Okay, welcome again, everybody. My name is Calandra Waters-Lake. I am the Sustainability Director here at William & Mary, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this month's Sustaina-bite. Hopefully you have grabbed your lunch and you are ready to hear from our guest speaker today. Before I hand things over to him, I have a couple announcements and things to go over. Sustaina-bite is our lunchtime info session. We have a sustainability person come in, an expert from the campus or local community, and they talk about their area of expertise through that lens of sustainability. I like to kick the meeting off, though, with a land acknowledgement. You can find this acknowledgement on the American Indian Resource Center site. That's the William & Mary American Indian Resource Center site. So I'll start with this. I would like to recognize the Indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherenhaka-Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Patawamak, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members past and present. Some of the other things that I like to go over for our Sustaina-bites are just a quick reminder on what is sustainability. So this is the university definition for sustainability. It recognizes the interdependence of human and natural systems, really looking to ecological principles as models, creating healthy, happy, and resilient communities, as well as healthy economies that recognize ecological limits, and decisions that recognize cause and effect across time, scale, and place. As you can see, sustainability is about more than surviving or continuing. It's about thriving. We think of sustainability as an ongoing and intentional process. At William & Mary, it's viewed as a pursuit. It's action-oriented, much like maintaining your health. Sustainability is not a target that is achieved and set aside. It's really an ongoing effort. If you're looking for ways that sustainability is applied, we do have a university plan, and we just launched our climate action roadmap. We also like to feature the Sustainable Development Goals, which some of you might be aware, there's quite the emphasis on climate action right now. And so I highly encourage you to go to this website if you have not already been to the United Nations website on the Sustainable Development Goals. It's very user-friendly. These tiles all flip over and explain different ways sustainability applies to these and goals that are set for them. The Climate Action Roadmap for William & Mary, one more announcement, was just released on Friday. So I hope you have a chance to head to our website. There's also been a press release. So ways to get to that Climate Action Roadmap are available out there. And I encourage you to look through it. The website also has the goals broken out, so you can see the very enthusiastic participation we've had from across the campus on creating these goals. All right, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Reverend Max Blalock, who serves as the Wesley campus minister, and we'll be talking today about climate change and religion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Max to join us. Hi, Max.
Hey.
I'll let you share yours.
Okay. Let me make that happen, and we will get rocking and rolling. Once again, as I learn the great uses of technology, I pretend like I've never used PowerPoint or Zoom before in my life. So can y'all see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. So the biggest part of this PowerPoint, one, I want to thank y'all for being here with everything that's going on in our world and in our families and in our communities and this point in the semester. I think it's a miracle that anybody shows up to things like this. So thank y'all so much for being here, and thanks a ton to Calandra for inviting me to share with y'all and to have this discussion. I'll tell you, my part is probably going to be about 30 minutes, and hopefully that'll leave us 30 minutes to have a discussion and listen and learn from one another, and get some insights from each other, because I'm not the expert on any of this, but I know enough to be dangerous. So it is great to be with y'all, and I look forward to our time together. I thought I'd start off, the primary purpose of the PowerPoint is just to make sure that we're all on the same page when we even know what we're talking about when it comes to climate change and some of the highlights, because as y'all know, hey, let's talk about religion, or hey, let's talk about climate change. Okay, you got a week. So this will only cover some of the things that's going on, but we can discuss some of the things, and I've cited my sources on this so that we can be clear on what's happening. But y'all can see, from this, the burning of fossil fuels, coal and oil, is the primary reason that we're experiencing climate change. That has been clear, even though there's lots of other folks making other claims. Thankfully, they're a very vocal minority, but this is happening primarily because of coal and oil burning, producing copious amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and to a lesser extent, it's clearing of land for agriculture, industry, and other human activities. But these are the main reasons that we have climate change today. Are these actual reasons for climate change and why we're experiencing it now? Also, what does this mean for us? So, a intergovernmental panel on climate change of more than 1,300 scientists from the U.S. and other countries forecast that in this century we're in, we will see a global temperature rise of between 2.5 and 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in case you're wondering what that means, when we had the last ice age, when glaciers covered, a large amount of North America, the temperature change that caused that, the global temperature change that caused that, was a decrease in temperature of between 5 and 9 degrees, was all that it took. So when we're talking about these kinds of changes in degrees, it's going to be very severe unless we take action, humans take action to change the way we're living on this planet. So what are some of the effects? Temperatures will continue to rise. The frost-free season and growing season will lengthen. Now, some people might think, hey, that's good, we can grow more things. Well, no, not really, because that means things are going to be a lot warmer, a lot longer. So the plants and animals and insects and everything that are used to growing seasons and patterns are completely screwed up. And most farmers aren't used to having such a long growing season and planning for 2 growing seasons possibly, and all the things that results in, because this frost-free season and longer growing season results in changes in precipitation patterns, which results in more droughts and heat waves. NASA said hurricanes will become stronger and more intense. If we've been paying attention, that's already happening. Sea level will rise between 1 and 8 feet by 2100, and the Arctic is likely to become ice-free in the summer by the middle of this century. I'm not sure why the Glasgow Climate Change Conference decided this was the primary photo they wanted on their homepage for the conference, but this is what they did, what they had. So I thought, I'll just go with it. In case you don't know, the I can't remember, I'm blanking on what COP stands for. It's the concerned parties or something. I don't remember, but the COP conference number 26, focusing on climate change, is happening right now in Glasgow, bringing world leaders together to talk about how can we deal with climate change. So it's pretty apropos that we're discussing this today. Here's some of the highlights that the New York Times highlighted as what's going on. That China and the US said they'll do more to cut emissions this decade. That's really important because China and US are the two primary countries that have been responsible for the most greenhouse gases throughout world history. But you'll get to see in just a minute, I'll show you how those numbers break out some. The 6 big automakers in dozens of countries agreed to phase out gas car sales. There's no agreement, though, on how to achieve greenhouse gas emissions cuts to achieve only a 1.5 degree rise in global temperature this century. The Paris Climate Accords that occurred back in 2015, that for a while under the previous administration, the US opted out of, and now we're back in, they had lower goals than to achieve only a 1.5 degree rise in temperature with emissions cuts. And they were hopeful, I'm not really sure why, that some countries would up their commitment so that we could achieve it without coming up with a way to do it. There's no agreement on how to help fund greenhouse gas cuts in developing countries that don't have the resources to fund these cuts, even though they're the smallest contributors to this, or how to reimburse developing countries for the effects already happening as a result of climate change. And we're going to talk about that more in just a moment as well. Studies by the World Bank predict that as many as 216 million people in 6 regions of the world may be forced to move by 2050. This includes communities in some of the most impoverished regions of the world, such as Yemen and the Horn of Africa. And I don't know the religious background of many of us or of any of us necessarily besides myself. Thank you, Conference of the Parties. Thank you so much, Calandra, for that. But you know, most of our religions at our best, most of the world religions, pretty much all the world religions at their best talk about loving our neighbors and caring for our neighbors. And when we're looking at if we don't do something, 216 million people will be forced to move. The term that's being used is climate refugees, which is already happening because of drought and because of conditions in parts of the world. That is a huge concern, but that's not the only concern. There's other individuals that we don't even think of. When I was doing my research, I came across this and I thought, man, these are people who are stateless, who are going to be dramatically affected by climate change and already dramatically affected by so many things that have to do with religion. If you just read this, they live in countries where they don't have citizenship or permanent residency and have virtually none of the rights that permanent residents and citizens have. And there are millions of people who fit this category, and they're primarily, not exclusively, but in addition to the 250 million that were just mentioned before. The Muslim Rohingya community in Myanmar, North Koreans in China, the Roma in Serbia, and many other groups. What does this mean? It means they live in communities affected by heat waves and unseasonal rains that devastate their informal and poorly organized settlements, refugee camps, to be honest with you. That they face persecution already, but then when you add these conditions like rainwater mixing with wastewater, the absence of sewage and sanitation systems, stagnant water, they have an exponential increase in the risk of waterborne illnesses such as diarrheal diseases. And that's just with an increased rain. But packing and moving for them is, if not impossible, then highly unlikely. The high cost of moving and the risk of harassment and persecution outside their community of fellow stateless individuals make any move a potentially disastrous decision. So those are people that, to be honest with you, until doing the research for this presentation, it had not even entered my consciousness to think about people who are affected by climate change. And when we think about climate change, and when we think about who's affected and what's happening and the causes of it, we have to keep this in mind as well. Who are the people and the nations and the regions of the world primarily responsible for what's happening? Well, the United States has emitted more CO2 than any country to date. Now, this was as of 2017. We're responsible for, we meaning the United States, is responsible for 25% of all the CO2 emissions globally. That's twice as much as China, which is about at 12.5%. When you put all the countries of the European Union together, they've emitted about 22%. So, you know, between us and the EU countries, we've got almost 50% of the CO2 that's been poured into our atmosphere is simply by the United States and the European Union. One of the challenges that we have to think about is that many of the large annual emitters today are not the historical emitters, because it's countries such as India and Brazil, because a lot of the European Union and the United States have done passed a lot of environmental regulations and changes to decrease the amount that is being put out. And Africa's regional contribution relative to its population size has been incredibly small. So when we think about things historically, it's the United States and Europe that have been responsible for almost half of all the CO2 that's been emitted into the atmosphere to cause climate change. And thus ends the presentation as far as this part. And I wanted to stop for a minute before we move into more deeply into the religion part and just ask if anybody has any comments, any questions, anything you'd like to contribute as far as better information or more information. And you don't have to say it, you can put it up in the chat too. Well, it seems like I'm doing amazingly well. So thank y'all so much for that so far.
You're doing outstanding, wonderfully, and you're professional at the pause. You're good to go.
Thank you so much for that, Calandra. Well, now it's going to get fun, because I've included in the information, and you don't have to have read them at all, the information about religion and climate change in a couple of articles, and thinking about that. But you know, the reality is that to date, the global community has not done enough to prevent climate change. And climate change is present the disaster of climate change. We are still in the midst of this, and we have been hearing about it. If you're as old as me, I'm not throwing you under the bus with me, Calandra. If you're as old as me, I've been hearing about it for decades, and the warnings about it. I can remember back in the early 90s when I was in seminary, I was hearing about it. And if you look at the countries that are primarily responsible for almost half of the CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, the regions, I should say, because it's the European Union and us, and then you have China. You know, us and the European Union historically have been primarily Christian countries, for the most part. It's only until recent times that has decreased. So when we think about climate change, and when we think about religion, one of the things that we really are challenged to think about is, okay, what role has particularly white Western Christianity played in climate change and in the global effects of climate change? Because thank you, Calandra. Because if you're not aware, Christianity white Western Christianity has oftentimes endorsed the worst of colonialism and exploitation, and and the challenges that poses for now, as you know, as a lot of Christian, because now, and because of that, and because these countries that have been traditionally Christian have been responsible for most of the causes of climate change. The vast majority of literature that's out there from a religious perspective talking about climate change is Christian. And most of that, and if we look at the historically what's been happening religiously when we look at climate change, you know, we can go all the way back to 1988, and there's the World Council of Churches issued a statement about climate change and the environment. The Dalai Lama came out with a statement in 1990 talking about that, you know, that there have been statements down through the years by religious groups, you know, talking about this and raising it as an issue. This might shock some of us, that in 2006, U.S. evangelicals, a fairly significant group of U.S. evangelical Christians, came out with an evangelical call to action on climate change. There was another one issued in 2011. Of course, as is typical, once there was also a statement made by U.S. evangelicals in 2009, saying climate change, opposing, you know, doing something to decrease climate change was unchristian and they shouldn't do it. In 2009, Native peoples came up with the Mystic Lake Declaration. It was developed by the Native Peoples, Native Homelands Climate Change Workshop. There was the Anchorage Declaration in 2009 of the Indigenous Peoples Global Summit on Climate Change. And then in 2015, there was Laudato Si, which was an encyclical in 2015 of Pope Francis, which was huge with regards to climate change. And also in 2015, we had an Islamic declaration on climate change, a rabbinic letter on climate crisis, the Buddhist climate change statement to world leaders, a Hindu declaration on climate change, and an interfaith climate change statement. And in 2021, Indigenous Elders and Medicine Peoples Council statement to COP21 happened. So as you can hear me going through all this, there's been lots of religious groups making lots of statements on climate change, and the vast majority of them, outside of a couple of U.S. evangelical statements, have all been very positive statements as far as saying we need to do something about climate change. This is a crisis and things need to change. The problem is that so oftentimes there's no action behind this that brings about anything significant when it comes to decreasing climate change. This is either because the folks who are issuing the statements don't have that wide of an effect on the people they're making the statements about, whether that's Pope Francis or the World Council of Churches or any of these other groups. Or two, the people are incredibly committed to climate change and have been living lives that for, you know, most of their existence, if not all of their existence, that is committed to caring for the earth and not destroying the earth through climate change and pollution and other things, but they don't have a large enough voice and a large enough power to have as much influence as we would hope. And when I say that, I'm talking primarily about indigenous peoples and people who adhere to indigenous religions that have so much more for us to say about climate change and what's going on than so many of the other religions. Of course, with China being the second largest nation as far as producing CO2 emissions, and still one of the biggest today, Taoist and Confucianist scholars have not done much. There hasn't been much put out there yet from a Taoist or Confucianist perspective to talk about climate change and addressing it in meaningful ways as of yet. But that absolutely does not mean that Taoism and Confucianism don't have resources and don't have much to say when it comes to climate change. So the challenge for us is, how do we see our religion, if we are a person that's religious, as an effective motivation for bringing about climate change. I mean, because if we're Christian, there's lots of resources within Christianity for it. As I'm a Methodist pastor, I know that that's true, but are we going to act on it? If we're Jewish, it's the exact same thing. If we're Buddhist, you know, if we practice an indigenous religion, if we're Muslim, if we're Hindu, no matter what it is, that we have opportunities for bringing about change when it comes to climate change and for working together for that. And there are people who are doing that, but the challenge is so enormous. And the challenge is that, you know, just as Calandra has been doing a great job sharing with the introduction today about the stuff that's going on that the school is doing and that we can do individually to you know, to help when it comes to our environment and sustainability. One of the real challenges is that individuals can do everything we can possibly do, and all the stuff that I shared earlier about climate change will still happen if we're just focusing on our individual lives and the things that we can do individually. Because there's not going to be enough of us who, you know, quit driving or those kinds of things completely, because the biggest polluters are coal-fired power plants, and the biggest polluters are industries that are burning oil, and the biggest polluters are you know, corporations and entities that is going to take a collective will to change. And one of the things that's happening at the summit right now is that a lot of indigenous people and a lot of people from countries that are already being affected by climate change, already being affected by sea level rises, by drought, by flooding, they're already saying to the folks there at the summit and to the world leaders that are there, you know, something needs to change, and we need a response from the world with regards to climate change, similar to how the world responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. If we can do this as a world community to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, we can do this as a world community to deal with climate change so that this, you know, slow moving but incredibly devastating disaster does not happen. And folks are drawing on all kinds of resources, from religious resources, from personal resources. But I think one of the things that all of our religions at our best tells us is that we only make it together. That we're only able to do this and achieve these things if we do this in community with other people. And if we're building those communities and building those relationships, whether it's personal relationships, whether it's across the globe, whether it's, you know, via the internet or whatever it is, to build these relationships and communities, to build communities that really bring about this change. And you know, and if you ask me if there's hope, I really don't think there's a lot. But if there is, it's gonna be happening in community, because, you know, I'm just looking at y'all's names now, you know, because if it's just Tina working on it, Tina's probably gonna be great, but Tina's not gonna be able to change global warming for the entire planet. You know, if it's just Jennifer's gonna be great, but Jennifer's not gonna be able to do it, or Wayne or Patton or any of us, you know, or any of us here, if it's just up to one of us. But together, as Calandra does a fantastic job with Office of Sustainability, and so many of y'all do too, together we can make some really meaningful change. And that's the hope, that, you know, that we view whatever resources we have, particularly our religion, as a resource to fuel that change and to fuel us building communities together, rather than as reasons to divide us. One of my favorite artists from years past, and still today, I still listen to her today, is a woman named Ani DeFranco. And she is not only a musical artist, but a spoken word artist. And at the end of one of her spoken word pieces, she says, because every tool is a weapon if you hold it right. And I think that fits religion the best of anything I know, because religion is weaponized, as we have seen, by all those people who are stateless in places, or primarily stateless, and being persecuted, at least in part because of their religion. Usually ethnicity plays a role too, and oftentimes in those places, ethnicity and religion are being weaponized together to persecute folks. But religion is an incredible tool for bringing us together, for impetus and energy for doing good work together, and for changing the world together. But it's just a matter of how we use it. So that is it for my formal presentation. Now, I would love to hear from some of y'all on anything that I've said, anything that y'all are thinking about, any of your opinions when it comes to climate change and religion. Go for it.
Y'all are welcome to unmute yourselves directly, or you can drop anything into the chat.
I can go on and on, but I'd really like to hear. I'd really like to hear from some of y'all.
Hi, I had a question.
Absolutely.
So I think that specifically in like evangelical circles, there's a lot of people who do not think that we need to address climate change because they think that maybe like God will handle it or wouldn't let that happen, or it's part of God's plan or something. Could you just like talk about that a little bit? And I don't know how to combat that. I don't even know, but.
Haley, thank you so much for that question. Once again, you know, have we got a lot longer than this to talk about it? But the answer is yes. I mean, you know, this is, you know, you've opened the door, and I'm gonna walk through it. White Western Christianity is so wrapped up in white supremacy that there's no separating the two in so many ways. And I say that in general. I say that about white Western Christianity, and that's a whole other, you know, that's a whole nother discussion to have. But this is part and parcel with it, that, you know, it's not just, you know, I totally hear you on evangelicals saying it's not real and we don't have to fight it and opposing it. That is exactly right. That a lot of evangelicals are doing that. As I pointed out, you know, at least historically, that there were evangelicals who actually said, hey, we actually need to fight climate change, and there are still folks doing it. But the challenge is that for so many Christians, white Christians particularly, the challenge is that we, whether we're evangelical or whether we're mainline, the challenge is, are we moved to action to do something? And that's the biggest challenge. I mean, in some ways, I think evangelicals who are, you know, saying this is all a hoax and we don't have to do anything about it, in some ways, and I can't believe this is about to come out of my mouth, but I do agree, they're being more honest about things than some of the rest of us who are white and Christian, because we'll say, yes, we need to do something, but are we going to risk anything to do it? Is the question. When it comes to, you know, God's going to take care of it, you know, I mean, I know I'm assuming this is part of it, and Haley, you can feel free to jump back in and correct me. That, you know, Jesus is going to come back and just take care of it all. And, you know, from my perspective, well, you know, if we're, you know, right at 2,000 years since Jesus left and Jesus hadn't come back yet, I think it's pretty safe to say that we need to take care of it ourselves and do something about it, whether Jesus comes back or not, because there's no clarity that Jesus is going to be coming back anytime soon, because that's usually part of the evangelical aspect too. The way we approach it, I think, as far as how do we combat it, I think it's actually using the Bible. I think it's talking about, I mean, we can go right back to Genesis chapter 1 with creation, that when God created everything and saw that it was good. Every single time God created something, God said that it was good. And the best interpretation of the line where God, after God has created the humans in God's own image, God says, you know, okay, this is yours to tend and care for. So oftentimes in Christian circles, that language in the Hebrew has been translated, this is yours to dominate, this is your dominion. But that's really not what that means. It's yours to care for. And you know, that's our responsibility as Christians and as everybody. But when we're talking about this from a Christian standpoint, it's our responsibility as Christians to care for this creation that we're a part of. I mean, another piece of that is there's a great article that that I can throw in here. It's from the Christian Century by a Black theologian. Dang it, and now his name escaped. But he talks about one of the things we have to do as Christians and Western white Christians is change our relationship to the land. Because this whole idea of land as private property and land that is not part of the community has been and continues to be so destructive to communities throughout the world. Okay, I'm going to try to get to Jeremiah's question. And I can go, and if anybody has follow-up on that, please do. In the chat, what's the role of the institution of the church in climate change? In your experience in the church, etc., what do you think would mobilize members of faith to act in positive, meaningful ways to combat climate change? What needs to be done to motivate faith members? I've been doing a lot of research on looking at motivations for this. When I say research, I've been listening to podcasts, I've been reading, I've been doing this. The way it usually happens to get white Christians who, you know, sadly have most of the power in most communities, motivated to really work to bring about change is when their own personal interests align with the interest of the people who are being most affected. That is when change really tends to happen in communities. And this goes with talking to people about where they are. Hey, what do you see happening in your community as far as the climate goes? What are you hearing from farmers? What are you hearing from other people? You know, because the piece of it for me, and this isn't a good answer. Thank you, Caitlin and Jeremiah, for this. This is not a satisfactory answer because, to be honest with you, I guess I need to step back. What's the best way to get people motivated to change? If they're diehard into climate denial and diehard into evangelical Christianity that says God's going to take care of it, you're a better person than me if you've got a way to figure this out to get those folks moved. But if we're talking about moving the folks who are being influenced by those diehard folks who aren't diehard, then I think it definitely goes to utilizing the Bible, and it goes to loving our neighbors, because, you know, Jesus said the two greatest commandments are love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Paul takes it even farther in Galatians chapter 5. Paul says that the entirety of the law, all 613 laws, I think it is in the Hebrew scriptures, the entirety of the law is summed up in one commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. And if that's what we're called to do, and if making these changes, then this is the big thing, making these changes does not hurt anybody, ultimately. In fact, making these changes helps everybody, whether you believe climate change is real or not. Having communities that are less polluted, having air that is more breathable, having the land being more healthy, all these things are better for everybody. Having, you know, having communities coming together more, all those things are better for everybody. And they're definitely about loving our neighbor as ourselves. And they're definitely about following Jesus. And they're definitely about following the biblical call to action as far as caring for creation. And that's and that would be where I would start, because with a lot of evangelicals, it is absolutely about the Bible. And there are tons of resources. And I can share with Calandra if she wants to share it with y'all. We can send it out, some articles on this that will go more deeply into that. One of the most influential articles that I've ever read about this is actually from 1999, and it's called "Christianity and the Care of Creation" by Wendell Berry, and it was an essay that he wrote back then. And if you don't know Wendell Berry and you want to read something from somebody who would definitely speak the language of a lot of evangelicals as far as the care for the land, he's a great resource, and I'll include that in information that we can share with y'all moving forward. Thank y'all so much. These are fantastic. What else?
I can jump in just with a sort of a different perspective.
Absolutely.
A lot of radical environmentalists and a number of the shift away from kind of organized religion to neo-paganisms and interest in indigenous traditions is kind of motivated by the idea that most of the world religions, but especially the Abrahamic traditions, have been associated with a sort of a separation between human beings and nature. And that seems like just a minor point, but it ends up being a major one over the course of millennia of human history, in that we, even treating, the Bible in Genesis can certainly be read in terms of stewardship as a sort of Christian duty. But many indigenous traditions would say that doesn't even make sense, because it's still human-centric, and that what needs to happen is a decentering of the human in the first place, that humans are not separate from nature, we are nature. And until we, and modern Western science contributes here too, because the basic premise of science is to treat nature as a passive object. It has no agency. But if indigenous traditions think of nature as animated, as spirit is infused in it, and so it deserves, it's intelligent, and it has, and science is actually starting to catch up to those views and increasingly see consciousness in the natural world. So I think a deeper shift is really what's needed. That's more like a huge conceptual shift that seems unlikely to happen, and is a little bit separate from just getting people to believe climate change is even real.
Patton, thank you so much, because if you've gotten me to this, I'll actually there's the link to that article by that essay by Wendell Berry that I mentioned. But Patton, if I don't know if this is where you were going, but it's where I'll take it with what you said, because I so appreciate it, is that the resources are there for us understanding things in a different way in order for us to care for the earth. And they're primarily there in religions that are not white Western Christianity. They're in indigenous religions primarily. And those perspectives, it's what did I'm blanking on the quote. Somebody help me. What's the Audre Lorde quote that you about you can't tear down the master's house with the master's tools? Or I'm butchering this quote, but the momentum is so much in the other direction, which I think I hear. Thank you so much, Camille. You rock. The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. white Christianity, white Western Christianity, which, let's be honest, has been the primary, the justifier for so many horrors that we still deal with the repercussions of today, whether we're talking about people or whether we're talking about climate or whether we're talking about everything. You know, there's about a 99.9% chance that white Western Christianity is not going to give us the tools for dismantling this and changing things. We're going to have to look to other sources. And that's, I don't know if that's where you were going completely, Pat, and you can feel free to jump in and add more if you'd like. But I think it's looking to, excuse me, I think it's looking to indigenous people, it's in indigenous religions and indigenous perspectives. And the horror of what we're discussing is that so many of those people and those perspectives and those cultures and those lands are the very ones that are in the most danger right now due to climate change. That those are the communities being most affected for a variety of reasons, but primarily so much of it goes back to sorry, my neighbor's cranking up a car and it was really loud for a second. Thank you for that correction, Camille. You're even more awesome. Thanks a ton. That's the challenge is for those of us who were raised in white Christianity, because that's definitely me, are we going to be humble enough and vulnerable enough to say we have to learn a different way, which I think I know was part of what you were saying, Pat. We have to learn a different way of relating to the planet, of relating to creation, of relating to our fellow human beings, of relating to people of different cultures and different religions, so that we can all live together and survive together. Because, I want us to be clear about something. The earth is going to be fine. We're not going to destroy the planet. The planet's going to keep on going. We're destroying a shitload of life on the planet. But the planet's going to keep on going. It's just a matter of, how many species and how many people do we want to save their lives? And I mean, you get back to the question about evangelical Christianity. I know people have to believe it's real first, but heck, I said heck. I'm trying to be nicer with my language on Zoom. Not all y'all know me as well. Calandra's laughing. But heck, if somebody said, hey, if you get on board with this, to any of us, you can literally save millions of people's lives if this goal is achieved. Holy shit, wouldn't we all do it? And it's literally the reality. Okay, thank y'all. Jennifer, on both climate change and dealing with the pandemic, do clergy use the angle that God gave humans a mind to use to help themselves? So shouldn't we be working on our own solutions? Well, depends on which clergy we're talking about, Jennifer. That's the challenge. I mean, this really goes back to, yes, there's lots of clergy who say that. There are tons of clergy who say that. And there's tons of faith leaders that aren't just Christian who say that and definitely embrace that. The problem is that the people who are screaming the loudest and making the most noise are people who want to be anti-science and all of that. But yes, the problem is, though, that from my perspective on what you're raising, which is excellent, Jennifer, is that there's not enough clergy who believe exactly like what you said as far as God gave us a mind and we should do it, that are speaking up and speaking out against the disinformation and against the people who are literally pushing perspectives that kill people. Now, granted, I've moved into the pandemic as far as COVID-19, as well as climate change, as well as the pandemic of racial injustice and state-sponsored violence too. But yes, the challenges for white Christian clergy is to get white Christian clergy to speak out about it. the folks who agree with that and not just be silent on it and think that's okay. That is a journey that I've had to be on myself, is to realize that, you know, keeping my mouth shut when people are spewing such things or having such perspectives that are literally oppressing and abusing and harming other people, keeping my mouth shut is means I agree with them when they're spewing that stuff. It doesn't mean that I'm being neutral. It means that I agree with them. Elie Wiesel said that silence never helps the oppressed, only the oppressors. And that's the challenge for a lot of clergy, to be willing to risk reputation and risk church members being upset with us and risk losing income coming into the church because people get mad at us, in order to speak the truth in love, which, you know, is another wonderful scripture verse. That's what we're called to do, is speak the truth in love. And so oftentimes that's been weaponized to abuse and oppress other people, but I mean it as, we're called to speak the truth and to get people to stop hurting people and causing things to happen that hurt people. And it's primarily up to, you know, the burden's a whole lot on people like me, you know, white, male, Christian, pastor. We need to be speaking up and speaking out more. Thank y'all so much. We got a few more minutes. If anybody else has anything you want to throw out there, anything else to get the ball rolling, this has been amazing. Y'all are fantastic. Calandra didn't tell me it was going to be this good.
Well, you are a great presenter, but we do have a good turnout of folks, and I'm very happy to see if there are any other questions, comments. We've got a couple minutes left.
I think, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. I think I'm going to hop off, but I did want to just share that I'm really thankful for you coming and speaking with us. And I wanted to I haven't been exposed to church leaders that, you know, think in this way. And it's really refreshing from my perspective. So thanks again for speaking with us, and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. That means a ton. Thank you so much.
Looks like we have one more question in
Yeah,
the
thank you so much, Tina. Other than clergy, do you have suggestions for what individual church members can do to fight climate change? Yeah, join with other people who are already doing it, and other organizations that are already doing it. You know, I think that's the biggest thing, is so oftentimes we think, you know, well, and it might be in our church community, but we're the only one. But, you know, join in with other organizations that are already out there bringing about change. I mean, that's one of the things that I've been learning, is that, you know, to phrase it in church language, look around and see where God is already at work with other people working to fight climate change, and join in where God's already at work. That's the best advice I can give on that. If you're talking about within the church, you know, if you're talking about within the church and trying to build community to do that, it really means speaking up and speaking out. Even if you think you're the only one, because that's one of the things that I've learned, is that when we speak up and we speak out, all of a sudden we've created a space for other people who feel and think similar to us to if not find their own voice to speak up and speak out, to at least reach out to you and say, hey, I agree, what can we do together? It's one of the things about oppression, is oppression makes us think that we're the only one. We're alone in our perspective, if we have a perspective that we don't think is held by that many people. When you know, 99.9% of the time, that's never true, that there's other people out there. But you know, and this is one of the things when we're talking about fighting climate change, it doesn't even have to be explicitly a group that's only focused on climate change. There's so many different ways that we can join in with people to do something about climate change. I mean, some of the things we've been talking about today about misinformation and things like that. Hey, getting involved with groups that are doing, doing great work to improve education in the community. Working with people that are working to ensure that there's decent public transportation in the community so that folks don't rely on cars as much. That there's more green spaces so that more things aren't getting paved over. There's all kinds of ways to do that. But my recommendation to you is find some groups that are already doing it and, join in with what they're doing there. Thank you so much, Tina.
All right, Max, we really appreciate you coming and talking with us and leading a really great discussion. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up out of respect for everybody's time. And thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this with us. Any of the links that you provide, we will send out to the registrants via the email that they registered with. So we'll be following up with anything that you give us to those that registered. And again, this was recorded, so we'll be posting that online as well.
Okay. Hey, y'all, thank you so much. What a fantastic discussion. Calandra, as always, it's wonderful to be with you. And thank you so much for the invitation to do this. It was incredible.